Most people assume that staying broke is simply a matter of income, a temporary phase that will resolve once earnings increase. But if you observe financial patterns over time, a different structure begins to emerge, one that behaves less like a situation and more like a system that quietly sustains itself. Imagine two individuals earning modest incomes, both working consistently, both making reasonable decisions. Yet 10 years later one has accumulated stability while the other remains financially strained. Not because of dramatic mistakes, but because of small, repeated dynamics that compound in ways that are rarely visible in the moment. The core concept begins with friction, not in the physical sense, but in the financial sense, where every transaction carries a hidden cost that disproportionately affects smaller amounts of money. When someone operates with limited capital, every expense consumes a larger percentage of their available resources, which means recovery requires more effort relative to scale. A $50 unexpected cost is not just $50. It is a disruption of allocation, a shift in priorities, and often a delay in progress elsewhere. And when these disruptions occur repeatedly, they form a pattern that is difficult to escape. Psychologically, this creates a loop where decision-making becomes short-term oriented, not out of preference, but out of necessity. When financial margin is thin, the mind prioritizes immediacy, focusing on stability today rather than optimization tomorrow. And over time this shifts behavior in subtle ways. Opportunities that require patience, such as long-term investing or skill development, begin to feel distant or inaccessible, while immediate solutions, even if less efficient, become the default. This is not a failure of discipline, but an adaptation to constraint. The mathematics behind this dynamic is often overlooked because it operates quietly through percentages rather than absolute numbers. Consider two scenarios where one person can consistently allocate even a small portion of income toward long-term assets, while another cannot due to recurring expenses. The difference in early contributions may appear insignificant, but when compounded over time, the divergence becomes substantial. Growth in financial systems is not linear. It accelerates, meaning that early participation, even at low levels, has a disproportionate impact compared to delayed entry. At the same time, costs themselves tend to scale differently depending on financial position. Those with limited resources often face higher relative costs, whether through interest rates, lack of bulk purchasing, or reliance on short-term solutions. This creates a reverse compounding effect where instead of assets growing, expenses accumulate in a way that slows progress. The system effectively applies pressure from both directions, limiting growth while increasing drag. When we zoom out to a systemic level, these individual dynamics aggregate into broader economic patterns. Entire segments of the population experience similar constraints, which shapes consumption behavior, credit structures, and even pricing models. Financial systems are not neutral, they respond to behavior, and behavior is influenced by available margin. Over time, this creates feedback loops where certain financial positions become self-reinforcing, not by design of any single decision, but through the interaction of many small ones. What makes this particularly complex is that the thresholds involved are often invisible. There is no clear moment where someone transitions from constrained to flexible, but there are subtle tipping points where the nature of decisions begins to change. When a person gains even a small buffer, the ability to think longer term increases, which alters behavior, which then influences outcomes. The system does not require dramatic change. It responds to incremental shifts in margin. Understanding this changes the perspective from blaming outcomes to analyzing structures. The question becomes less about why someone is not progressing, and more about what conditions are shaping their decisions. Financial progress, in this sense, is not only about increasing income, but about reducing friction, stabilizing variability, and gradually expanding the space in which better decisions can be made. The math behind staying broke is not a single equation, but a network of reinforcing effects. Where limited capital increases cost sensitivity alters behavior, behavior affects opportunity, and opportunity determines long-term trajectory. Each layer interacts with the others, creating a system that is difficult to break through without intentional structural change. And yet, recognizing the system introduces a different kind of clarity, not as a promise of immediate transformation, but as a framework for understanding how small adjustments in margin, timing, and allocation can shift direction over time. The goal is not to escape instantly, but to gradually alter the conditions that define the system itself, allowing compounding to begin working in a different direction, one that is slower at first, but fundamentally more stable.